Hello, my name is John, and today we'll be reading The Triumph of Christianity, How a Humble Message of Hope and Compassion Carried All Before It, written by Bart D. Ehrman. This review is by Aram Bakshian Jr., Washington Times, March 27, 2018. Aram Bakshian Jr., an aide to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, writes widely on politics, history, and the arts. Ironically, religious scholar Bart Ehrman, engrossing historical evaluation of the rise and triumph of Christianity, really begins in his books afterwards. Mr. Ehrman describes how the idea for the triumph of Christianity first came to him 20 years ago during his first trip to Athens, while visiting the site of the ancient Agora and Acropolis. After describing the pagan splendor of the architectural remains, his story takes another turn. I was especially intent on climbing an otherwise unimpressive rock outcropping that, as a historian of early Christianity, I had known since my youth. This was the Areopagus, or Hill of Mars, where the Apostle Paul is said to have delivered a speech to Epicurean and Stoic philosophers upon first arriving in Athens during his storied travels. It is a fairly bleak spot with no classic ruins, marked only by a plaque commemorating Paul's speech. But from the Areopagus, you can view the magnificent remains of the Agora below and the Acropolis above. Paul's speech was some of Athens' best and brightest, delivered on this nondescript spot between two of the proudest monuments of classical Western civilization, was about one God over all, the ultimate being, the God who created the heavens and the earth, the God who is soon to judge the world and everyone in it, through the second coming of his Son Jesus, whom God had raised from the dead. Paul made few converts that day, and most of the assembled savants mocked, although a few wanted to hear more later. Later is a relative term. Standing on the same spot almost 2,000 years after Paul spoke there, it occurred to Mr. Ehrman that in the end Paul won. What Paul preached that day on the Areopagus eventually triumphed over everything that stood below me in the Agora, above me in the Acropolis. No one except probably Paul himself would have predicted it, yet it happened. Christianity eventually took over Western civilization. Dispassionately, almost clinically, and with an eye open to the faults as well as the virtues of the triumphant civilization that emerged and that we still live in today, the author qualifies, and tries to understand how and why it happened. A large part of the answer must lie in the universal and non-exclusionary nature of Christianity itself. We are all children, not slaves, of the same heavenly Father, and he is not an arbitrary hurler of thunderbolts, but a dispenser of justice and salvation. Unlike Hinduism and Judaism, ancestry and bloodlines have nothing to do with it, although Christianity did indeed begin as a messianic offshoot, one might even say heresy of Judaism, and derives many of its basic maxims and practical principles from Jewish moral teachings, most notably the Ten Commandments. What Christ added, not just as the eventually declared Son of God, but as a teacher and preacher and a man of peace rather than a man of the sword, like many of the Old Testament prophets and much later Muhammad, was the radiant compassion of the Sermon on the Mount. A new faith embracing all the divinely inspired moral force of the Ten Commandments and the God-given humanity of the Sermon on the Mount had an awful lot going for it, and go it did, Statistics compiled by sociologist Bart D and refined and tweaked by the author illustrate the incredible scope and pace. At the time of Christ's death, there were 20 known Christians. 70 years later, there were between 7,000 and 10,000. A century after that, there were between 140,000 and 170,000. In another 100 years, between 2.5 million and 3.5 million. 100 years after that, in 400 AD, there were 25 to 35 million, and Christianity was well on its way to becoming the nearly universal faith of civilized North Africa, the Near and Middle East, and Europe. Almost all of the evils that afflict the world today, and some that we have overcome, long predate Christianity. But the remedies for most of those evils, including the abolition of slavery and the struggle for universal human rights up to our own day, were the achievement of a Western civilization shaped by Christianity and still driven by many Christian values, now embraced by believers and non-believers alike. Reason enough, as Easter Sunday approaches, to celebrate the fact that a man named Jesus once walked among us, inspiring a living faith in a merciful, forgiving Heavenly Father. This video is a production of the School of the White Crane. My name is John Brooker, and you can reach me through commentary on this video or through my Gmail listed here. Please share this video with family and friends and on social media. May God richly bless you, my beloved.